Zixatal adjusted his sensory appendages for the fourth time in as many minutes, still unable to believe what his readings were telling him. The bipedal creature standing across the conference hall shouldn't have been alive, let alone laughing and socializing with other species as if this was perfectly normal. "You seem troubled, colleague," chittered Dr. Kovacs, their mandibles clicking in what passed for amusement among the Arxians. "Still obsessing over our newest galactic members?" "How can I not?" Zixatal's crystalline skin flickered with patterns of academic excitement. "They're from a Class 12 Deathworld, Kovacs. Class 12. The atmospheric pressure alone should have crushed them. The gravity should have turned their bones to powder. The radiation levels. And yet here they are, drinking our ceremonial nutrients and telling jokes." Kovacs waved a mandible toward the small group of humans who were, indeed, managing to make a delegation of normally stoic Valaxians emit their species' version of laughter. The Grand Galactic Conference of Species was meant to be a serious affair. Representatives from over 300 civilizations had gathered to discuss trade agreements, share technological advances, and welcome new species into the fold. The humans were this cycle's hot topic, having achieved faster-than-light travel despite their challenging origins. "But that's exactly my point." Zixatal's skin now pulsed with frustrated patterns. "Everyone's treating them like they're just another species. Have you seen their planet? They have storms that can level cities. Their oceans are filled with acid. They have seasons where the very air freezes solid. You're being dramatic, old friend. Not everything on their planet is trying to kill them." "No, just 95% of it." Zixatal pulled up a holographic display from his datapad. "Look at these readings. Their planet experiences regular tectonic shifts that can reshape entire continents. They evolved alongside apex predators that would give a Kraxon war beast nightmares. And don't even get me started on their planet's microorganisms." "Your point being?" "My point is that everyone expects them to be simple brutes. The Council's already whispering about restricting their expansion, limiting their technology sharing, keeping them contained. They look at their muscular density, their endurance, their ability to survive almost anywhere, and they see weapons, warriors, potential threats." A burst of laughter drew their attention back to the humans. One of them was now attempting to learn a traditional Valaxian greeting dance, making an admirable effort despite having 4 fewer limbs than necessary for the proper form. "And what do you see, colleague?" Kovacs asked, their antenna twitching with curiosity. Before Zixatal could answer, the conference hall's central announcement system crackled to life. The Council of Elder Species was about to begin their opening ceremony. As the crowd shuffled toward their designated areas, Zixatal noticed something odd about the humans. While everyone else was checking their translation devices and protocol guides, the humans were studying the room's architecture, noting exits, analyzing sightlines. "I see survivors," Zixatal finally answered. "But more than that, I see adaptation incarnate. And I think we're all about to learn that surviving a death world requires far more than just physical strength." The council members took their positions on the elevated platform, their ceremonial robes catching the light from the hall's crystal chandeliers. The head speaker raised their appendages for silence, but instead of beginning the traditional welcome, they made an unexpected announcement. "Honored representatives," the ancient voice boomed across the hall. "Before we proceed with our normal protocols, the council has decided to implement Statute 7B of the Integration Charter." A wave of confused murmurs swept through the crowd. Zixatal's skin went almost transparent with shock. Statute 7B hadn't been invoked in over 3 millennia. "For the safety and security of all galactic species," the head speaker continued, "our newest potential members must prove their worth through the 3 trials of integration." All eyes turned to the human delegation. To everyone's surprise, they weren't showing signs of fear or anger. Instead, the corners of their mouths were turning upward in what Zixatal recognized from his research as smiles. "Now this," whispered Kovacs, "should be interesting." Zixatal couldn't have agreed more. The council thought they were putting the humans in their place, containing a potential threat. But watching the calm confidence on the humans' faces, Zixatal had a feeling the council had just made a monumental mistake. The 3 trials were about to show everyone that Deathworlders were far more than just warriors. They were about to become legends. Commander Chen maintained a perfectly neutral expression while the council listed out the trials, though the corners of their mouth twitched slightly at the dramatic pauses between each announcement. After 15 years of deep space exploration, they'd learned that sometimes the best response was no response at all. The trials will test not just strength, but the very essence of what makes a species worthy of joining our galactic community, the head speaker droned on, their tentacles writhing with what Chen suspected was smug satisfaction. Each participating species will select one champion to represent them. A Nexarian diplomat nearby leaked anxiety pheromones strong enough to make Chen's eyes water. The council's announcement had thrown the entire conference into chaos. Species representatives huddled in corners, discussing strategy or lodging protests. Some were already withdrawing from the competition. First, the head speaker's voice cut through the chaos, an engineering challenge that will test your ability to solve complex problems under pressure. Second, a diplomatic scenario that will evaluate your capacity for maintaining peace. And finally, yes, there will be combat. At the word combat, several delegates shifted away from the human group. Chen noticed a Valaxian actually extend their defensive spines. Each species who wishes to prove their worth must register their champion within the next standard hour, the head speaker concluded. Those who choose not to participate will be relegated to provisional status for the next 100 cycles. The human delegation didn't need an hour. They'd selected Chen before the announcement was even finished. As Chen approached the registration platform, a Drachnid observer hissed under their breath. Typical Deathworlder, always eager for a fight. Actually, Chen said, turning to face the surprised Drachnid, I'm more interested in the engineering challenge. Did my doctoral thesis on quantum containment fields. But hey, if you want to discuss combat techniques over dinner, I also make a mean soufflé. The Drachnid's scales flushed with embarrassment as nearby delegates tried to hide their amusement. Even Zixatal, who was frantically recording everything from the sidelines, let out a sound that might have been a chuckle. Champions approach the central platform, called out Subspeaker Vix, their bioluminescent patches glowing with official authority. You will now receive the detailed parameters of each trial. Chen joined the other champions, a towering Crax warrior, a Meridian collective mind, a quantum phase Etherian, and surprisingly, a Nexarian engineer who looked like they might pass out at any moment. 5 champions total, 5 species willing to put everything on the line. The engineering trial will involve saving a failing space station, Vix announced. The diplomatic challenge requires resolving a centuries-old conflict between the Proxima and Centauri clusters, and the combat trial. They paused for effect, will be revealed at the time of engagement. Question, Chen raised their hand, ignoring the disapproving looks from the other champions. Are we allowed to collaborate during these trials? The question sent ripples of confusion through the assembly. Zixatal's recording crystals actually cracked from sudden overload. Collaborate, Subspeaker Vix seemed to struggle with the concept. These are trials of worth, Champion Chen. Each species must prove their own value. Right, but technically, proving we can work well with others would demonstrate our value to a galactic community, wouldn't it? The Subspeaker's bioluminescence flickered in confusion. They huddled with other council members, speaking in rapid clicks and whistles. Finally, the head speaker addressed the assembly. The trials will be conducted individually, they declared firmly. Any collaboration will result in immediate disqualification. Worth a shot, Chen shrugged, then turned to the Nexarian champion with a friendly smile. Good luck with the engineering challenge. Those quantum containment fields can be tricky. The Nexarian's fear scent decreased slightly as they nodded in appreciation. From his observation post, Zixatal furiously recorded every detail. Did you see that? He whispered to Kovacs. They tried to turn a competition into a cooperation, and then immediately adapted when denied, while simultaneously offering support to a potential rival. Indeed, Kovacs clicked thoughtfully, perhaps there's more to surviving a Deathworld than just physical resilience. Champions, you have one standard rotation to prepare, the head speaker announced. The engineering trial begins at dawn. As the assembly dispersed, Chen couldn't help overhearing snippets of conversation. The human will dominate the combat trial. But they'll never solve a complex engineering problem. Did you know they still use combustion in some of their vehicles? Chen just smiled. Let them underestimate humanity. After all, there's nothing more dangerous than a species that spent its entire existence proving everyone wrong. The holographic projection of Outpost Gamma 9 spun slowly in the center of the testing chamber, its critical systems flashing angry red. 5 separate control stations surrounded it, one for each champion. Chen could hear the Nexarian champion's exoskeleton rattling with anxiety from 2 stations over. "The station's quantum core is experiencing a cascading failure," announced the chief engineer of the council. "You have 30 minutes to prevent total destruction. Begin." The Cracks warrior immediately started rerouting power to the structural integrity fields, a brute force solution typical of their species. The Etherian champion phased into quantum space, probably trying to directly manipulate the core's atomic structure. The Meridian collective mind began running billions of simultaneous calculations, their crystalline form glowing with processing power. Chen did none of these things. Instead, they pulled up the station's maintenance logs. "Champion Chen," the chief engineer's voice carried a note of confusion. "The core is reaching critical levels. Perhaps you should—" "When was the last time someone cleaned the ventilation filters?" Chen interrupted, eyes scanning through years of records. What? "The ventilation filters. They're supposed to be cleaned every 3 months, but according to these logs, it hasn't been done in 2 years? Chen whistled. "That's not great." The other champions paused their work, confusion evident in their various biological displays. The Cracks warrior actually growled in frustration. "The quantum core is failing," they roared. "What do air filters have to do with anything?" Chen pulled up another display, this one showing the station's thermal distribution. "Everything, look at these heat patterns. The core isn't failing, it's overheating. And it's overheating because the ventilation system is running at 23% efficiency." The Nexarian champion suddenly chittered, their anxiety momentarily forgotten as they examined their own readings. "The dust buildup is preventing proper heat dissipation." "Bingo!" Chen's fingers flew across the control panel. "But we can't just clean the filters now. There's not enough time. We need to create an artificial heat sink until the core cools down." The Meridian collective mind chimed in, their harmonics indicating interest. The station's water recycling system, it could be repurposed. "Now you're thinking," Chen grinned, "but water alone won't be enough. We need something else, something cold enough to—" They stopped, a gleam appearing in their eyes. "Hey, quick question. This station wouldn't happen to stock any human beer, would it?" The chief engineer consulted their records. "Cargo Bay 7 contains several containers of something called Frost Giant Imperial Stout. It's listed as a human recreational beverage." The Cracks warrior made a sound suspiciously like a snort. "You want to cool a quantum core with primitive fermented grain water?" "Nope," Chen replied, already redirecting the station's internal transport system. "I want to cool it with liquid nitrogen. Beer brewers use it to flash freeze their hops. Each container of Frost Giant has about 2 liters of the stuff." The Etherian champion phased back into normal space. "But the nitrogen would need to be precisely directed to be effective." "That's where you come in," Chen pointed at them. "Your quantum phase abilities could control the flow perfectly." Then they turned to the Cracks. "Those structural integrity fields you set up? They'll keep the station stable while we work." To the Meridian, "Your calculations can time everything down to the microsecond." Finally, to the Nexarian, "And your species' expertise with fluid dynamics makes you perfect for managing the water recycling system?" For a moment, nobody moved. Then the chief engineer cleared their throat. "While collaboration was explicitly forbidden—" "We're not collaborating," Chen interrupted. "I'm just thinking out loud about how I would solve this if I had certain abilities. Can't help it if others happen to overhear and make their own decisions." The Nexarian made a sound that might have been a laugh and began adjusting the water recycling systems. The Cracks warrior strengthened their integrity fields with renewed purpose. The Etherian phased into position near the core, while the Meridian's crystals pulsed with rapid calculations. Chen started the sequence. Liquid nitrogen flowed from the beer containers, guided by the Etherian's quantum manipulation. The Nexarian's perfectly calibrated water system provided secondary cooling. The Cracks' fields held the station together as thermal stress threatened to tear it apart. And the Meridian's calculations kept everything synchronized down to the smallest fraction of a second. 3 minutes before the deadline, the core's temperature dropped into normal ranges. The station's warning lights turned green. In the observation gallery, Zixatal was practically vibrating with excitement. Fascinating, he exclaimed to Kovacs. They didn't just solve the engineering problem, they found a way to incorporate everyone's strengths while technically following the rules against collaboration. Indeed, Kovacs clicked thoughtfully, although I suspect the council won't be pleased about the method. As if on cue, the head speaker's voice filled the chamber. While the station has been saved, Champion Chen's solution relied heavily on suggesting actions to other champions. Not at all, Chen replied smoothly. I solved the problem using available resources. Some of those resources just happen to be sentient beings making their own choices. That's what humans do. We work with what we have. Sometimes it's duct tape and WD-40. Sometimes it's beer, nitrogen, and quantum beings. The council chambers erupted in confused discussions. The other champions were looking at Chen with new appreciation. Even the Cracks warrior seemed impressed. The council will deliberate on the validity of this solution, the head speaker finally announced. Champions, prepare for the diplomatic trial, which begins in 3 hours. As they filed out of the testing chamber, the Nexarian champion approached Chen. Your species is very strange, they chittered. You solved an engineering crisis with beer and clever words. Chen shrugged. When you come from a planet that's constantly trying to kill you, you learn to get creative. Besides, they added with a wink, wait until you see how we handle diplomacy. The diplomatic chamber was divided by a shimmering force field, with the Proxima delegation on one side and the Centauri on the other. Both species looked remarkably similar. Tall, crystalline beings with multiple facets, except the Proxima sparkled blue while the Centauri gleamed red. Your task, announced the Council's chief diplomat, is to negotiate a peace agreement between these species who have been at war for over 300 years. The Cracks warrior lasted exactly 6 minutes before storming out, muttering about impossible crystal heads. The Etherians' attempts at quantum-based communication resulted in both delegations threatening to leave. The Meridian collective mind's logical arguments were met with centuries of emotional grudges. The Nexarian tried their best, but ended up hiding behind their datapad. Then it was Chen's turn. Before we start, Chen said, walking into the chamber, I just want to verify something. You're fighting over mining rights to the Helios asteroid belt, correct? They stole our ancestral harvesting grounds, shouted the Proxima leader. We discovered those asteroids first, the Centauri chief countered. Right, Chen nodded, and you've been fighting over these rocks for 300 years because the asteroids contain critical resources for our crystalline growth cycles, both leaders said simultaneously, then glared at each other through the force field. Fascinating, Chen replied, pulling out what appeared to be a small rubber ball from their pocket. Mind if I ask you both a question while I think? They started bouncing the ball against the chamber floor. What's your favorite color? The question was so unexpected that both delegations fell silent. What relevance does this have to our conflict? Demanded the Proxima leader. Humor me. Bounce. Blue, obviously, said the Proxima leader. Red, stated the Centauri chief. Interesting, Bounce. And why those colors? Because they represent the wavelengths our bodies naturally resonate with during growth cycles. Both leaders answered, again in unison. They looked at each other in surprise. You know what I'm wondering? Bounce. Have either of you ever tried growing with both wavelengths simultaneously? The ball bounced higher this time. The crystalline beings tracked its movement, their facets shifting in thought. That's impossible, the Proxima leader said, but with less certainty. Is it? Chen caught the ball. Because I've been reading about your biology, and there's nothing that suggests it wouldn't work. In fact, theory suggests a dual wavelength approach might accelerate growth rates by 47%. But the traditional methods, the Centauri chief began. Let me tell you about Earth traditions, Chen interrupted, resuming their bouncing. We used to fight wars over which way to crack an egg. No joke. Big end versus little end. Lasted generations. Now we just make omelets and don't worry about it. A few crystal facets twinkled in what might have been amusement. Here's what I see, Chen continued. Two species perfectly capable of sharing resources stuck in a war because nobody ever questioned if there was a better way. You're not fighting over the asteroids. You're fighting over assumptions. The ball bounced between the two delegations, passing straight through the force field. Both sides watched it, their crystalline forms vibrating at harmonious frequencies. Did you know, Chen added casually, that when human children fight over a toy, we sometimes make them play together with it? They usually end up having more fun than if they had played alone. The Proxima leader's central facet rotated thoughtfully. A shared mining operation, with both red and blue light frequencies. Impossible, the Centauri chief said, but they were studying the asteroid belt hologram with new interest. The equipment modifications alone would cost less than 1 day of your current war, Chen pointed out, still bouncing the ball. And think of the research possibilities. Nobody's ever studied dual-frequency crystal growth before. You could revolutionize your entire species' development cycles. The chamber was silent except for the rhythmic bounce of the rubber ball. Then slowly, the Proxima leader spoke. Perhaps a trial period, 1 mining station jointly operated, with strict oversight and equal resource distribution, the Centauri chief added quickly. And combined scientific research teams, both said together, then actually laughed. Chen caught the ball one final time. Well, would you look at that? 300 years of war, ended by a rubber ball and some common sense. In the observation gallery, Zixatal was frantically recording everything while Kovacs's mandibles clicked rapidly. They used a child's toy to solve a centuries-old conflict, Kovacs marveled. And did you notice? No formal negotiations, no complex treaties. They treated 2 warring species like squabbling children, Zixatal replied, and somehow made it work. A Deathworlder using toys and jokes to make peace. The council won't know what to make of this. Indeed, the council members were huddled together, their confusion evident in their postures. Finally, the chief diplomat spoke. While unorthodox, the solution appears to be acceptable to both parties. However, Champion Chen, your methods were highly irregular. You know what's irregular, Chen replied with a grin. A planet where everything's trying to kill you. Makes you really appreciate the value of finding unusual solutions to survive. Sometimes that means using duct tape to fix a spaceship. Sometimes it means using a bouncy ball to fix a war. As they left the chamber, Chen could hear both crystalline species excitedly discussing joint research projects. The other champions were staring at them with expressions ranging from confusion to admiration. Just the combat trial left, the Cracks warrior rumbled. Finally, something straightforward. Chen just smiled. After all, who said combat had to be straightforward? The combat arena loomed before the champions, a massive geodesic dome filled with various terrain types. Holographic barriers shimmered, creating distinct combat zones. The stands were packed with delegates from every species, eager to see how the Deathworlder would demonstrate their legendary fighting prowess. Champions, the combat master's voice boomed across the arena. Your final trial is simple. Defeat the Xenoth. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Even the Cracks warriors' scales paled slightly. The Xenoth were autonomous combat drones, relics of an ancient war programmed with centuries of combat data. They were considered unbeatable in direct combat. Each champion will face 1 Xenoth, the combat master continued. Victory must be achieved within 30 minutes. You may use any means at your disposal, but you must render your opponent non-functional. The Nexarian went first, attempting to hack the Xenoth's systems. They were knocked unconscious in 3 minutes. The Etherian tried phasing through the drone's defenses, but couldn't affect its quantum-shielded core. The Meridian collective mind lasted longest, predicting attack patterns, but eventually fell to the Xenoth's adaptive programming. The Cracks warrior put up an impressive fight, but was ultimately overwhelmed by the drone's superior combat algorithms. Then it was Chen's turn. Weapon selection is available, the combat master announced as Chen entered the arena. Choose wisely. Chen walked past the weapon racks without a glance. Instead, they pulled out their personal datapad and a small speaker from their pocket. Champion Chen, the combat master's voice held a note of concern. The Xenoth is activating. Please select a weapon. Already got one, Chen replied, tapping their temple. Several million years of evolutionary problem-solving up here, plus this datapad and some tunes. The Xenoth activated, its metallic form unfolding like a deadly flower. Combat data from countless battles flickered across its surface. It was beautiful, in a terrifying way. Hey there, Chen called out to the drone. Before we start, want to hear something cool? The Xenoth paused, its programming momentarily confused by the non-aggressive opening. In the stands, Zixatal leaned forward so far he nearly fell. This is a really old human song, Chen continued, fiddling with their datapad. From back when we were still figuring out digital music. The interesting thing about it is the frequency patterns. Music began playing from the small speaker. It was a simple, repetitive electronic tune. The Xenoth surface rippled with data as it analyzed this unexpected development. See, early computer systems were really vulnerable to certain audio frequencies, Chen explained conversationally, slowly walking in a circle around the drone. They could cause buffer overflows, system crashes, all sorts of fun stuff. We called it a fork bomb back then. The Xenoth took a step forward, then stopped. Its surface flickered erratically. The really neat thing about this particular song, Chen continued, increasing the volume slightly, is that it was accidentally created when someone tried to convert old computer code into music. The code was actually a classic fork bomb program. The drone's movements became jerky. Combat data scrolled across its surface at increasing speed. But you know what's even neater, Chen grinned. While I've been talking, my datapad has been analyzing your operating frequencies and modifying the song in real time to match your system's resonance patterns. The Xenoth froze completely, caught in a cascade of conflicting commands as the manipulated audio signals played havoc with its ancient programming. Smoke began rising from its joints. And the neatest thing of all, Chen held up their datapad showing complex waveform analyses. I've been recording your system's reactions to create a feedback loop. You're basically being defeated by your own processing patterns, amplified and played back at precisely the right frequency to cause a gradual system overload. The drone's surface went completely dark, then with a sound like a long sigh, it slowly collapsed in on itself, its quantum core safely shutting down to prevent catastrophic failure. The arena was absolutely silent, then the combat master's voice, slightly shaky. The Xenoth has been neutralized. Champion Chen is victorious. What just happened? The Cracks warrior demanded from the sidelines. That wasn't combat. Sure it was, Chen replied, collecting their speaker. I identified the enemy's weakness, developed a strategy to exploit it, and achieved victory with minimal risk to myself. Isn't that what combat is about? But you just played music at it. On my planet, we have these tiny creatures called bombardier beetles. When threatened, they mix chemicals in their bodies to create an explosive reaction that deterred predators. We have fish that use electricity to stun their prey, plants that communicate through chemical signals to warn each other of danger. Chen shrugged. Nature taught us that combat isn't always about who's strongest. Sometimes it's about who's cleverly using the resources at hand. In the observation booth, Zixatal was practically vibrating with excitement. Did you see that? They defeated an ancient war machine with music based on principles from their early computing days. More importantly, Kovacs clicked thoughtfully, they demonstrated an understanding of their opponent that went beyond mere combat. They showed that true strength lies in knowledge and adaptability. The council members were huddled together, their discussion animated. Finally, the head speaker addressed the assembly. Champion Chen, they announced, your methods in all 3 trials have been unprecedented. Well, yeah, Chen replied, we're from an unprecedented planet. When every day is a survival challenge, you learn to think outside the box, sometimes way outside the box. Sometimes you have to throw away the box entirely and make a new one out of whatever's handy. You turned an engineering crisis into a lesson in cooperation, the head speaker continued. You resolved a centuries-old conflict with a child's toy and basic logic, and you defeated an unbeatable combat drone with sound waves and clever programming. Don't forget the beer nitrogen, Chen added helpfully. That was pretty creative too. For the first time in recorded history, the head speaker made a sound that might have been a chuckle. The Council has reached a decision. Humanity has proven themselves to be far more than simple deathworlders. Your species' ability to find unconventional solutions, to adapt and overcome challenges in unexpected ways, and to turn potential adversaries into allies, these are the qualities we truly value in the galactic community. The assembly erupted in cheers, even the defeated champions joined in. The Xenoth, reactivated after its safe shutdown, actually bowed to Chen before being led away. Though perhaps, the head speaker added dryly, we should reconsider allowing human music in sensitive areas. Chen just grinned. After all, they still hadn't shown the galaxy what humans could do with interpretive dance. The Grand Galactic Conference reconvened 3 days after the trials. The massive hall buzzed with excited conversations, theories, and debates about the events they'd witnessed. Zixatal had somehow managed to position himself right next to the human delegation, his recording crystals practically glowing with anticipation. "The council has finished their deliberations," the head speaker announced, their voice carrying across the chamber. The room fell silent. What we witnessed during these trials was unprecedented in our history. Chen stood relaxed but alert, hands clasped behind their back. Around them, the other champions had chosen to stand nearby, rather than with their own delegations, an unexpected show of solidarity. "We expected," the head speaker continued, "to see a demonstration of Deathworld brutality. Instead, we saw something far more remarkable. In the engineering trial, we witnessed not just problem-solving, but the ability to recognize and utilize the strengths of others while technically adhering to competition rules." The Nexarian champion's exoskeleton rippled with what looked like pride. "In diplomacy, we saw not force or coercion, but an understanding of fundamental patterns in sentient behavior, applied with both wisdom and what humans call humor." The head speaker actually adjusted their formal robes in what appeared to be embarrassment. "And in combat, we observed victory achieved through intelligence and creativity, rather than violence." "Though the music was a bit much," muttered the combat master, who was still dealing with occasional audio glitches in their systems. The head speaker raised their appendages for silence. "But perhaps most significantly, we observed something else. Something that has led us to a startling conclusion." They paused, their next words carefully measured. "Humanity's greatest strength is not their ability to survive a death world, it is their ability to thrive despite it, and to help others do the same." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Chen raised an eyebrow, waiting. "Therefore," the head speaker announced, "the Council proposes not just to accept humanity into the galactic community, but to create a new position, adaptation specialists." Now it was Chen's turn to look surprised. Next to them, Zixatal's recording crystals cracked from excitement overload. "Your species," the head speaker explained, "has demonstrated an unprecedented ability to find solutions where others see only problems, to create cooperation where others expect conflict, to transform limitations into advantages. These are qualities our community desperately needs in an expanding galaxy." The Proxima and Centauri delegations, now sitting together, nodded in agreement. Their joint mining operation was already yielding remarkable results in crystal growth research. "But more than that," the head speaker continued, "you've shown us something about ourselves. We saw Deathworlders and expected warriors. Instead, we found teachers, innovators, mediators, problem solvers who use children's toys and primitive music to overcome challenges that have stymied us for centuries." Chen stepped forward. "With respect, head speaker, we are warriors too, but on Earth, our greatest battles were never against predators or harsh environments. They were against our own limitations, our preconceptions, our fear of change. We learned that survival isn't just about being the strongest, it's about being able to adapt, to think differently, to find new ways forward." The head speaker's bioluminescence pulsed with approval. "Then let this be the first of many such adaptations. The galaxy is changing. Perhaps it's time we changed with it." As the assembly erupted in applause, Kovacs clicked quietly to Zixatal. "You know what this means, don't you? Your research on human adaptive capabilities just became the most valuable anthropological study in the galaxy." Zixatal's crystalline form sparkled with joy. "Indeed, but I've also learned something else. We've been asking the wrong question all along. It was never about how humans survived their death world." "Oh, no." Zixatal watched as Chen was surrounded by delegates eager to learn, to understand, to adapt. "The real question is, how did their death world produce a species so determined to help others survive?" In the center of the crowd, Chen pulled out their rubber ball and began teaching a group of crystalline beings, gelatinous entities, and energy forms how to play catch. Above them, the council watched with mixed amusement and amazement as ancient species learned new tricks from a young race born on a planet that should have killed them. Sometimes it seemed the harshest crucibles forged not the deadliest warriors, but the most innovative teachers, and that perhaps was the greatest plot twist of all.